Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and today for Poetry Thursday, I'm going to be reading two poems from Dorothy Parker. Now, my choice of reading Dorothy Parker today is sort of a nostalgic trip back to my teenage years. I don't remember what it was that at first drew me to Dorothy Parker, but I think that she was really the first poet who I read that was not writing for children. Um, she introduced me to a number of things, and I think that for people who are afraid that maybe poetry might be too intimidating, who have a hard time getting into poetry, I do think that Dorothy Parker can be an excellent gateway into it. Uh, Her subject matter was more mature for a teenager. It was more mature for me. She uses, poetic devices with the rhyme and the meter, and so you'll she's a good introduction, I think, to those sorts of things as well. She does have a very good use of language, but I think above all, she has a real satirical wit to her. She has a biting humor. Many of her poems are a little bit like punchlines, which I think is very easily accessible. It certainly opened up my eyes to what poetry could be. And really, in reading Dorothy Parker as a teenager, that's what got me interested in poetry overall, and also got me writing my own poetry. Her poetry holds a special place for me. It's been a long time since I've gone back to this, though. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, which were the poems that really stood out to me when I was young and that influenced me. So I'm going to read those two today. They both happen to come from her first collection of poetry from 1926. Of course, she would write quite a few collections of poetry. This is the complete works, and it's fairly sizable book for poetry. Of course, Dorothy Parker is famous for she was a writer for the New Yorker. She's part of that Algonquin Roundtable, I think they called it. The kind of it sounds a little bit obnoxious, but these intellectuals that would hang out at the Algonquin Hotel in New York. Uh, and she also, of course, would end up going to Hollywood and write some Academy Award winning scripts. Um, she also somebody who suffered from, you could say, mental health issues. And one of the poems that I'll be talking about, and this is just kind of a warning for people who have a difficult time with this subject, but she did she did attempt suicide a few times, and one of the poems in here does have to do with that subject, the second one. And it's her playing with that subject, which I knew was real for her. This wasn't somebody writing about suicide who had never thought of it seriously, never experienced it seriously, never attempted it seriously. She pretty much had done that, but she was still able to almost bring out, I don't know about a lightness, but there was a little bit of a humor and looking at the situation. So again, people's mileage will vary with that. But again, as a teenager, that sort of thing really stood out to me. All my life, I've been attracted to art that takes, I guess, what you could say is, objectively ugly, whether it be in music, ugly sounds, or in movies, with horror, ugly images. With writing ugly subject matter, and then somehow transform it into something that you can't look away from, or that you can't stop listening to. It suddenly becomes beautiful in a way. And I've always been attracted to that in art. And she was, for poetry at least, my gateway into that world. So, without further ado, the two poems I am going to read are from her first collection, which was originally published in 1926. And that was a collection called Enough Rope. And the first poem I will read is a well-worn story, and the other poem is Resume, which, if you take away the accents, it reads as resume. So certainly a double meaning there. So at this point, let's go on with the reading. A well-worn story. In April, my one love came along, and I ran the slope of my high hill to follow a thread of song. His eyes were hard as porphyry, with looking on cruel lands. His voice went slipping over me like terrible silver hands. Together we trod the secret lane and walked the muttering town, and I wore my heart like a wet red stain on the breast of a velvet gown. In April, in April, my love went whistling by, and I stumbled here to my high hill along the way of a lie. Now what should I do in this place but sit and count the chimes, and splash cold water on my face, and spoil a page with rhymes? Now, I think elements of this poem certainly feel like a younger writer, and she was a younger writer at that point. It's a little bit self-reflective as far as, consciously writing a poem, spoil a page with rhymes, about a broken up relationship, the sort of thing that you would, obviously, I think would be attractive to a teenage reader. But still, I like a lot of things that she does in this, even now that I've entered my 40s. I love that line, I wore my heart like a wet red stain on the breast of a velvet gown. I think that's a terrific line. But I remember this poem distinctly influencing a lot of the stuff that I would try and write myself when I was a teenager. And now let's go on to the next one. The next poem is Resume. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acids stain you, and drugs cause cramp. Guns aren't lawful, nooses give, gas smells awful, you might as well live. Now, of course, this is a poem that deals with some pretty dark matter, but there was a certain dark humor to it when I was a teenager that I certainly was attracted to. She's going through all these different ways that you can end yourself, but they're all unpleasant. And I think you could read it in different ways, but it seems to, you know, even if you're depressed, it seems like she's looking for a way to get out of her possibly permanent decision. But it was one that definitely played with me in, an imaginative sense when I was a teenager. Again, that, finding that kind of darkness and then that kind of little glimmer of almost humor or lightness at the end was certainly influential. So anyway, those were two poems by Dorothy Parker. Again, if people are just trying to get into poetry, I do think that she is a good gateway. I think that she'll, certainly help to whet an appetite for more poetry. It certainly did for me when I was a teenager. So anyhow, that's Poetry Thursday for today. As always, thank you, BookTube.